Year 12. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the tiger, which features in Blake's Songs of Experience. It's one of Blake's best known poems actually from the collection, so it'd be interesting to come up with some ideas behind why that is the case and why it's attracted so much attention since its time of writing. This, as all of Blake's poem on the offset, doesn't seem to be a truly complex poem. But as we zoom into some of the key interpretations and imagery and words and symmetry and patterning that's been used by Blake, we begin to see that this is a fairly complex poem and a greater comment about creation and actually where we come from. So I'm just going to share my PowerPoint now. And the first thing that I want to talk of, to begin with, is actually looking at this image. Whilst it was painted a good 100 years after the tiger was written, it's something that hopefully you may have seen before. I mean, for me personally, I remember coming across this when I was at primary school, and we were talking about the different colours, we were talking about where the prey is in that painting. And I think there's always been this innate fascination amongst art and culture around the image of the tiger, how the tiger paradoxically incorporates both beauty, destruction, fear and awe into what it symbolises here. If you actually want to see that in person, I think it is at the National Gallery in London. I think it still is. So the question is here then, if I move out the box, so how does this painting present the tiger? So I want you to think about what you might notice and wonder, and feel free to pause this video to make some notes on that. Now, the tiger is, when you mention it and when you come to write on it, it has to be dealt in conversation with the lamb. Now, if you cast your mind back to Songs of Innocence, the lamb was all about affirming the idea that God had created the lamb. So as I've said here, there's a certainty that the lamb is created by God, and how the lamb is actually an image of its maker. The Lamb of God we usually associate with the representation of Jesus, and we see the lamb as one of the most innocent of God's creatures. There's further understanding about the lamb and children also having their own affiliation as well. Now, why this is interesting for us to consider is because the lamb obviously incorporates everything that is meek, mild, vulnerable, pure and innocent, in contrast to the role of the tiger, who I guess incorporates a lot more about the two contrary states of being. You know, we kind of see the simplistic, okay, yeah, it was God that made the lamb, when actually we don't have that sense of fulfillment within the tiger. Now, I'm going to start off by talking about symmetrical patterning. In the poem, The Tiger, you'll notice after having read it that the first and the last stanza are exactly the same, bar the change from the verb could to the verb dare, which we're going to come on to in a moment. And because of that, we have the idea of symmetry or parallels. And I want us to be thinking about how this links with the two states of humanity. And even at the end of the poem, we're left with the word symmetry. So it's obviously something that Blake is motivated by and wants us to question. Now, for me, I feel that this idea of symmetry comes down to the fact that the two contrary states of humanity are not symmetrical. And actually the world in which we live in is anything but symmetrical. We have constant contrasts. Like what I've said through, you have terror, but admiration, beauty, danger, beauty and destruction, good and evil. So therefore there's a paradox here presented, and I want you to question why that might be the case. I'm now going to begin talking you through stanza by stanza of the poem. So please make sure you have that in front of you and at the ready. Now, essentially, this poem is all about the speaker's fascination by the beauty of the tiger and questions the reasons and the purposes behind the maker and their thoughts behind creation. Because how can something so beautiful have the capability to be so fierce? And then really considering about what the motivations behind that were, and therefore questioning ourselves, where did the lamb came from? Why is it that the maker of humanity, of the world, chose to create something so beautiful and gentle, yet something so fierce and dangerous? But there's, as we know, a lot more complex thoughts emerging from this. So we start off with the reference to tiger burning bright. So the alliteration of the burning bright, and on one level it kind of represents the shining light and the beacon of thought and questioning things, white heat and awe, yet also how unapproachable this tiger is if it is burning bright. It's full of anger, passion, and perhaps fierce determination. So the two are kind of in paradox with each other. And also something to say on that, this poem is full of metaphor, which I'm going to come on to in a moment, but obviously this tiger is not literally burning, so this is definitely a much deeper message than that. And the tiger is actually appearing in the forest of the night. So this idea that there is that concealment or that hidden element behind where the tiger comes from, the messaging behind the tiger, as though it kind of chums back with the religious poetry that we've been looking at with Holy Thursday, this idea that there's this concealment of understanding in either the world of experience in order to perpetuate the status quo, or whether it's the fact that there are these kind of unanswered questions still. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? So we have this idea that there is an immortal creator. And as I've already said, the question therefore is then, why create the tiger? Why create something that we are feared of, sorry. However, whilst the speaker of this poem seems to acknowledge that the tiger has been made by God, the poem doesn't give any answers towards anything else surrounding that topic. So therefore, there is this idea that the tiger in its sole existence is something that is also divine in its being, and actually, where was that going to be? Oh, and therefore thinking about how that's going to be linking with artistry as well. In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? So we have this repeated imagery of the fire that's coming through. On what wings dare he aspire? Now, this reference to the wings here is one that refers to Icarus from classical and Greek mythology. Now, Icarus is a character who flew too close to the sun. His father had fashioned him some wings that were created from wax, and as he approached closer, the wax obviously melted and he died. We also have another link to a Greek myth, and that's the myth of Prometheus. What hand dare seize the fire? And Prometheus's role was to educate and kind of help the innovation of human beings. So what he did was he took the fire, which the gods had made and created, and sent this forward to humans on Earth. Now, what happened to Prometheus is that he was eternally tortured for this act in his way to educate and also within his realm be the god of perhaps the humans, and maybe that's what Zeus was fearing. So by linking with these classical and Greek mythology, Blake could be hinting at here the cosmic forces at play. We're now delving into a world of, past classical stories, once again heightening the value of this poem as we begin to think about who the divine maker is and how that is in conversation with us reading it. Notice as well the use of rhetorical questions. It's as though we're expected to agree with these questions, not answer them, because ultimately we can't answer them. We don't know why there is the burning of fire in the tiger's eyes, and we don't know how the creator came into these desires to create the tiger. As we come on to the third stanza, you'll see lots of references to bodily imagery in the physical form of the tiger. The shoulder, which is linked with the art. So notice that Blake here is making that artistry comment here. Could twist the sinews of thy heart. We've then got how the heart is beating, the dread hand and the dread feet. Now, if you think about it, these are all quite unusual bodily parts to be drawing upon, which perhaps shows the complexity of thought and imagination as the tiger was being created. Notice as well the repetition of the word dread, the dread hand and the dread foot, which once again corresponds with that idea of fear and that drudging repetition coming off there, that there's always something to be scared of as we ponder this question. But it also hints towards this supernatural force and power. There's a combination here of the physical strength of the tiger and also the imagination of the artist who created it. So we have a particular link between the elevation of artwork and how that combines with the divine creation as well. If we move on to the next stanza, we have further development and interpretation about making and forming and moulding things. We have reference to the hammer, the chain, the furnace, the brain, the anvil. So this idea then is presented about how it's almost like there's the apparatus that's being used to craft this tiger, which could also, if we think about bringing contextual information, be a direct link to the Industrial Revolution. And how, as we know with Blake, who was actively kind of criticising the Industrial Revolution and the objectivity of human beings as a result of that, how the tiger is almost made unreal here, because it's as though the human or whoever is that the thing that's creating it, it's down to their imagination, and actually there is nothing authentic or original about it, but it's actually been manufactured and created and made, which therefore makes us question to what extent is human creativity and imagination actually being destroyed by that of manufacturers. So when we move on to the next stanza, we have reference to the stars that threw down their spears. Now, critics say that that is a direct link with Milton's Paradise Lost, which we've done a little bit of exploration on, and how it also manifests into this idea of science and reason again. So not only is human life being controlled and moulded by that of Industrial Revolution and evolution of invention, but it's also being thrust into question by science and stars and the exploration of space and ideas all coming around scientific discovery during this period, which once again places into question where we're supposed to be from. So this poem is definitely asking more questions than it does with the answers that seem to be provided to us in the Lamb. But actually, as we think about the role of stars here, are the stars surrendering to the tiger's power, or actually are they marveling at it as well? As we move on to the final stanzas, as I've already mentioned, we have this cyclical structure that is formed, but we have a change from the word could, which is a modal verb, to dare. So if we think about the impact of this change, Now, if you think about could, it suggests kind of a gentle step towards something coming about, a suggestion of aspiration and willfulness, whereas dare is something that is more forceful, this sense of might and sort of fearfulness towards the approach. Therefore, this tiger seems to encompass ideas upon passion, wrath, energy, and actually what it does is it challenges the idea of this benign creator, and actually once again puts into question whether this god of sorts is actually a benevolent god, or is it one that is actually we should be far more fearful of, rather than being complicit in our entire support of it. I didn't actually talk about Shelley's Frankenstein, but the reason why I wanted us to consider this is because for me, this poem really makes me think about Frankenstein being the divine maker of his monster, and how that also links with Prometheus, because in Mary Shelley's introduction, she references the fact that Frankenstein definitely was inspired by Prometheus. And we have this interplay between the power and the hierarchy between who the divine creator is and how they correspond with their product, essentially. Now, the role of fire here is definitely very important to our understanding of the poem. I've said here that fire represents on one level this idea of creation, yet destruction, but how it also has a cleansing idea to it, as well as warmth as well. I now want to come on to looking at meter within the poem. Now, it's something we've been briefly touching on, but as I said before, if we're going to be referencing AO2, which is obviously very important for our essays and exams, we need to be explaining how that adds to our interpretation of the poem. It's no good to just reference something and say, oh, okay, well, I've seen this being used, if you're not going to elaborate on why that's been used and the overall effects that it's contributing to the poem. We have here tiger, tiger, burning bright. The meter that is used for this poem is trochaic meter. As you can see on the screen, it suggests that it starts with stressed and then moves to unstressed. Now, we're more familiar with iambic meter, probably through the form of iambic pentameter when we've looked at over Shakespeare, through Key Stage 4 and our collection of poetry. And what iambic meter is supposedly suggestive of is the natural flow of conversation, where you go from so I can't even do it now, tiger, tiger, burning bright. And it doesn't feel right. Obviously, I made an idiot of myself there. But if we look at trochaic meter, you'll notice with the red how there is that first beat on the tiger, tiger, burning bright. So it brings a sense of drumming beat to the poem, which could be echoing the sort of the hammer and the furnace and the anvil that we see in the middle stanza, and have that relentless creation and making. But it could also emphasize this, and it is a poetic concept known as catalexis. And you can see here that it suggests that it is a metrically incomplete line of verse lacking a syllable. What that is suggestive of is the idea that bright and night here need another syllable for it to be a complete line. But obviously we need to interrogate why that is an incomplete line and the lasting effects of that. Now, I think here, in my interpretation, that's down to the fact that our answers are incomplete about the idea of creation and making. And it really kind of adds to that bold emphasis that we don't know this, and forces perhaps the questions to linger. I've been speaking a lot about the idea of the maker and creation and divine beings, and these are some of the textual references that I think really draw upon that. I didn't mention the word frame as we first began analysing this. But I think the word frame is really interesting because it suggests here that it is down to the artist or the maker who fashions what the tiger looks like. So right from the offset, we have this idea that the tiger is actually something that is made. And obviously you can see some of those quotations there. As with all our poems, we need to be tying this into the genre of social and political protest. So these are some of the ideas that I think work well alongside it, but obviously this is always open for your further interpretation. But we have here a challenge to conventional religion, and actually rather than accepting it, we should be questioning it. And actually, as we can see, there is this sort of malevolent God that comes across here as well. How the tiger is an image of revolution. Now we know that Blake is writing during and just after the French Revolution, and how there were attempts and successes at taking down the monarchy, and actually how the tiger is something, you know, rumbling amongst the jungle, ready to pounce, ready to charge with that energy and vigor, and therefore how that suggests that a revolution in terms of thought and idea is around the corner, and actually a challenge to the controlling states. We have a comment on the Industrial Revolution, as I've already spoken about, and this objectification of human beings, which Blake is certainly in sort of protest of, and how that is erasing original human thought and complexity, and how mass production is actually making us more homogenous. How the tiger is not an external alien menace, but something that usurps the human soul and mind, something which romantics criticise. So we have this idea of the tiger being like the wild inside of the human soul, the beast within us, and those unconscious desires and drives which are therefore concealed by, well, public face and our sort of unchallenging desire to kind of go ahead with the status quo and the way things are. And there is a final sense of awe at both the creature and the creator, that just, it does go beyond mere terror. And a final question for you to really reflect upon is, who is this tiger? I've said to you that this poem is full of metaphor. So how would you pinpoint the ultimate metaphor for this poem? How does this poem speak to you, and what is it suggestive of in terms of social and political protest? So I will leave that there with all those questions for you to consider. If I